The first signs came quietly, not with royal announcements, not with ceremonies or speeches, but with whispers, faint murmurs slipping through the stone corridors of Balmoral Castle, the kind of whispers that make even seasoned palace staff pause and glance over their shoulders. Something was happening behind those heavily guarded walls, something so unexpected, so emotionally charged, that even those closest to the crown didn't know how to process it. It began, as so many royal stories do, with silence. King Charles had fallen ill again. The public was told it was exhaustion, perhaps stress from the constant scrutiny, but those who'd seen him said otherwise. He looked frail, older than his years. His once commanding voice had softened to a near whisper, and for the first time, his sister, Princess Anne, saw something she'd never seen in him before: fear. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And had always been the strong one, the no-nonsense royal who got things done while the rest waded through gossip and emotion. But this time, when she sat beside her brother's bedside, something broke through that stoic exterior. His hand trembled as it reached for hers. "And," he whispered, "there's something I must tell you before it's too late." What he said next would alter the royal family forever. You see, the monarchy thrives on tradition, on predictability. The air is always clear. The future always planned. But what happens when the king himself decides to rewrite destiny? When his final wish doesn't follow the royal script? That's the storm Princess Anne walked into. At 74, still sharp, still composed, and had weathered decades of palace politics. She'd seen scandals rise and fall, from Diana's heartbreak to Harry and Meghan's dramatic exit. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the contents of the letter her brother handed her that night. It wasn't simply a farewell. It was an instruction, a royal confession wrapped in heartbreak and fire. And it named the one person no one expected: Prince Harry. The same Harry who'd walked away from the royal family. The same Harry who'd publicly criticized his own blood, accused the institution of cruelty, and chosen a life across the ocean. So, why would the king's final wish involve him? And why did Princess Anne, the most loyal of all, break royal silence now? Let's start from that moment. The night Anne discovered what her brother truly wanted. The castle was quiet, almost hauntingly so. Outside, a cold Scottish wind howled against the stone walls. Inside, the king lay propped against silk pillows, pale, eyes half shut. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II that hung above him. And stood by the window, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. She'd faced many storms in her lifetime, but none like this. When Charles spoke again, his voice cracked. "I've written something for the family to know when I'm gone. But I want you to read it first." He handed her an envelope, thick, cream-colored, sealed with the royal insignia. Her breath caught. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because you'll understand," he said. "You always have." And nodded, her throat tight. There was something in her brother's eyes, something between sorrow and resolve. And in that silence, she understood this wasn't about protocol. It was personal. Hours later, alone in her chambers, Anne opened the letter. The words inside were simple, but devastating. It wasn't just a letter of succession or farewell. It was a statement of his deepest regret and his final wish. Charles believed that the monarchy could only survive if it was led by someone who had truly known both sides of the royal divide: privilege and pain, crown and chaos. He believed that person was his youngest son, not William, not the heir he'd trained all his life, but Harry. Can you imagine what it must have felt like for Anne? To read those words, knowing the chaos they'd unleash? To realize that her brother, the King of England, had just upended the very foundation of the royal line? The letter went further. It was clear, detailed, and shockingly emotional. "If my son Harry returns to this family," Charles had written, "and frees himself from the influences that divide us, I wish him to carry the crown forward. Not for tradition's sake, but for the heart of the people. Frees himself from the influences that divide us." It didn't take much for Anne to understand who he meant. Meghan Markle, the woman many in the royal circle still view as the reason for the family's fracture. And so, there it was, the king's final wish. A request not of politics, but of emotion. A plea for redemption. A final, impossible condition. Harry could ascend, but only if he returned to Britain and divorced Meghan, and sat frozen, her heart pounding. She knew the world could never hear this. Not yet. Not while her brother lived. Not while the family teetered on the edge of another scandal. But fate has its own timing. Weeks passed. Charles's health continued to decline. Royal doctors came and went in discreet black cars. The palace released reassuring statements. His Majesty is resting comfortably. But inside, and watched her brother fade. Each day, the weight of that letter grew heavier. How do you keep a secret that could shatter the monarchy? She'd confided in no one, not even her children. But one evening, as she walked through the rose gardens, lost in thought, she saw William watching her from a distance. His expression was wary, suspicious. He'd noticed her unease. "Is there something you're not telling me, Aunt Anne?" he asked later that night. She paused. "There's always something, William. The question is whether you want to know." He didn't push further then, but his words lingered. Anne knew, sooner or later, the truth would find its way out. Because secrets in the royal family have a way of escaping. Always. As the weeks turned to months, rumors began to swirl. The Kingswell had been updated. Certain courtiers were being called into private meetings. Harry's name had been mentioned, quietly, but unmistakably. And then came the leak. A palace aide, perhaps careless, perhaps deliberate, hinted to the press that the king's final message to his children will surprise everyone. The tabloids exploded. Theories spread like wildfire. Was the king abdicating early? Was he bypassing William? Was Meghan involved somehow? No one knew for sure. But inside the palace, Anne's world was unraveling. She'd promised her brother she'd keep his word safe until the time was right. But what if that time had already come? And what about Harry? Thousands of miles away, in California, living his version of peace. Was he even aware of what was coming? Did he have any idea that his father, the man he once accused of betrayal, still saw in him a future king? And couldn't shake the thought. There's something profoundly haunting about royal duty. It demands everything: loyalty, silence, sacrifice. And in that moment, Anne felt the crushing weight of all three. The British monarchy had survived wars, divorces, scandals, and public humiliation. But could it survive this, a king's dying wish that defied tradition itself? When Anne finally looked at the letter again, she noticed something she'd missed before. At the very bottom, in Charles's fading handwriting, were three final words: "You will know." She didn't understand them at first, but they echoed in her mind for days. And then one morning, she did know. Because a call came from the palace, a simple, cold message. The king's health had worsened. The family was being summoned to Balmoral. As Anne packed her things, she realized the moment she'd been dreading had come. Soon, the world would ask questions, and she would have to decide whether to honor her brother's request or protect the family from itself. The drive back to Balmoral was long and quiet. The Scottish Highlands rolled by, heavy under gray skies. Memories of childhood flickered through her mind. Charles and her riding ponies, laughing without titles or duties. And she thought, for a moment, about how far they'd all come and how much they'd lost. When she arrived, William was already there. His eyes were tired, his jaw tense. Beside him stood Camilla, calm but unreadable. The doctors were whispering in the corner, and took her brother's hand. It felt cold, fragile. He opened his eyes, faintly smiling. "You've always been my rock," he murmured, and squeezed his hand. "And you've always been stubborn." A faint laugh escaped him. Then he said it again. "You'll know what to do." Those words, spoken so softly, felt like an echo of the letter. Hours later, the palace issued a brief statement. His Majesty is under close medical supervision. But what they didn't say, what they couldn't say, was that a decision had already been made. Not in the council chambers, not by Parliament, but by a sister holding a secret that could tear the family apart. In the days that followed, Anne would face the hardest choice of her life: whether to reveal her brother's dying wish and risk a royal implosion, or bury it forever and live with the guilt of silence. But before she could decide, something unexpected happened. An email arrived in her private inbox from Harry himself. It contained just 6 words. "I heard about the letter." "What?" And froze. How did he know? Had someone leaked it? Had the palace been compromised? Or had Charles himself told him before his decline? Questions raced through her mind, each more terrifying than the last. Because if Harry truly knew, then the clock was ticking. And if William found out first, The crown itself could collapse into chaos. The first whisper was so faint that even the maids didn't believe what they'd heard. It drifted down the ancient stone corridor of Balmoral Castle, the kind of sound that disappears before you can name it. But by the next morning, it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was an omen. Something was happening to the king. Scotland's grey skies hung low that day, the kind that never really brighten even when the sun tries. Balmoral, usually buzzing with the hum of royal staff and discreet conversations, had fallen into a strange, uneasy quiet. The guard spoke in hushed tones. The kitchen clatter softened to the rhythm of dread. And in the west wing, behind a heavy oak door, Princess Anne stood motionless, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the man in the bed. King Charles, her brother. He looked smaller than she remembered, fragile, almost boyish in his frailty. The doctors had warned her his health had taken another turn, and had learned long ago that words like minor setback in royal language often meant something far worse, and wasn't one for theatrics. She'd never been prone to tears or panic. The British public admired her for that, her steel, her discipline, her refusal to indulge the emotional spectacles that had plagued the royal family for generations. But this was different. This wasn't politics. This was blood, family, history hanging by a thread. And, Charles whispered, his voice rasping, almost lost under the hum of the oxygen monitor. Close the door. She obeyed silently, her boots echoing softly across the rug. The moment the door shut, the air changed. It was heavy, charged with something sacred. He looked at her with eyes that carried both exhaustion and an impossible weight. You've always known when the time comes, you'll be the one who must carry it. Carry what? She asked, though part of her already feared the answer. The truth, he said. The truth they'll never forgive. And didn't flinch. Charles, you need rest. This can wait. He shook his head weakly. No, time doesn't wait for kings, Anne. You know that. He coughed, a sound that made her heart lurch. When it subsided, he reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, his grip trembling but deliberate. I've left something for you, he said. It's in my desk. Top drawer. Locked. The key is here. From beneath the blanket, he drew a thin gold chain. At the end of it hung a small key, old and tarnished, and stared at it. What is it you've done? He gave a small, weary smile. Something I should have done years ago. She didn't press further then, not out of fear, but respect. Whatever this was, it wasn't an impulsive act. Charles wasn't reckless. Every move he made was deliberate, calculated, burdened by the weight of the crown. For him to break that pattern now meant whatever lay in that drawer was beyond royal protocol. It was personal. When Anne left his room that night, she could still feel his gaze on her back. Outside, the wind whipped through the pines, carrying whispers that even the castle itself seemed to hold its breath for. In the study, the desk sat as it always had, immaculate, old as the monarchy itself, smelling faintly of leather and ink. She hesitated before using the key. Something about the moment felt wrong, almost intrusive, as if she were crossing into sacred ground. Still, she turned it, the lock clicking open with a sound that seemed to echo down the hall. Inside, neatly folded, was an envelope marked simply, "To my sister. Read alone." Her throat tightened. She sat, the letter trembling in her hand, and for a moment, she just stared at her own name written in his handwriting, firm, deliberate, yet fragile in its finality. When she opened it, her breath caught. "My dear Anne," it began, "if you are reading this, then my health has left me with little time to act in person. You have always been my most trusted confidant, the one constant voice of duty and truth in a world of pretenders. What I am about to write is not for the council, not for Parliament, and not for Camilla. It is for you, and for the future of the crown." Anne's eyes moved faster now, heart thundering. The next paragraph cut like a blade. "I have long known that the monarchy cannot survive another generation of division. The public has lost faith in crowns and titles. They believe only in humanity now, in honesty. And the only one among my children who knows both sides of that, who has seen the world without the filter of privilege, is Harry." She stopped. The words didn't make sense. Harry? Of all people. She kept reading. "I have made my peace with the fact that my reign will be brief. Perhaps that is for the best. But if the monarchy is to mean anything when I am gone, It must be led by a man who understands what the people have become, not one who only understands the throne. William was born into duty, but Harry was forged in rebellion, and it is rebellion that keeps the crown alive. Anne's pulse quickened. She read on, every line more impossible than the last. But this cannot happen while he is tied to the woman who turned him against his own blood. If Harry returns to this family and frees himself from the influences that divide us, then I wish him to carry the crown forward, not as a symbol, but as redemption. And felt her stomach twist. The king's dying wish, to place the future of the monarchy in the hands of the son who'd abandoned it. On one condition, divorce Meghan. She sank back into the chair, the letter trembling in her grip. For a long while, the only sound in the room was the wind outside and the faint ticking of the clock. Divorce Meghan. Return home. Rule. It was madness. It was mercy. It was both. Anne's mind spun with the implications. What would William say? What would Camilla do? How would the British public react if they knew that the king himself no longer believed in his chosen heir? She could see the headlines already. Charles bypasses William for Harry. It would be chaos. A civil war in gold and blood. And yet, Anne understood. In a strange, painful way, she understood her brother's heart. Charles had always seen a part of himself in Harry. The restless spirit, the defiance against expectations, the quiet ache of being misunderstood. But he'd also seen the tragedy in it. Harry had Diana's fire, yes, but also her fragility. And perhaps, in his final act, Charles wanted to heal the wound his own life had deepened, and pressed her fingers to her temples, her composure breaking for the first time. Oh, Charles, what have you done? That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, seeing faces dance in the light. Her brother as a child, their mother's quiet strength, William's steady eyes, Harry's lost innocence. The future of the crown felt suddenly fragile, like glass about to crack under the weight of truth. By morning, the castle had begun to stir again. The staff went about their routines, unaware that in a locked drawer, the course of royal history had just been rewritten, and kept the letter close, hidden in the folds of her coat. Her eyes were red but steady. She visited Charles again, early, before anyone else was awake. He smiled weakly as she entered. You've read it. She nodded. You've placed an impossible burden on me. Not impossible, he whispered. Just necessary. You know what this will do to William, she said. To the monarchy. He closed his eyes. The monarchy will endure. It always does. But the family must be saved, even if it breaks in the process. Anne's voice trembled. You think this will save it? I think truth always does, he murmured. She wanted to argue, to plead with him to reconsider, but something in his face stopped her. This wasn't a king speaking. It was a man, an aging brother facing the end, desperate to make things right, even if it meant tearing everything down. When she left the room, the corridor felt colder, the air thicker. Somewhere deep in her chest, a voice whispered that things would never be the same again. And she was right, because 3 days later, someone leaked news to the press. A single line in a foreign tabloid. Palace sources suggest the king's final instructions contained shocking succession details. Anne's blood ran cold. The leak had begun. That evening, she received a call from William. His voice was controlled but sharp. Aunt, and do you know anything about this rumor? What rumor? That father might have written something naming Harry. Tell me it's nonsense. And said nothing. Anne. His tone hardened. You would tell me if this were true. I would, she said softly. But her voice cracked on the last word. William exhaled sharply. You're hiding something. I can hear it. I'm protecting something, she corrected. And you'd do the same. Silence hung between them. Thick, suffocating. Please, he said finally. Whatever you're doing, be careful. This family doesn't survive many more secrets. The line went dead, and stood there, staring at her reflection in the window. The Scottish rain streaked down the glass like tears she refused to shed. She knew then that it was only a matter of time before the truth reached Harry himself. And when it did, there would be no stopping what came next. Because in that letter, in those trembling words written by a dying king, lay a choice that could either redeem a son or destroy an entire dynasty. But that moment hadn't come yet. Not quite. Not until the day Anne saw a message appear on her phone. A message from a number she hadn't seen in years. It was from Harry, and all it said was, I know. Her hand froze over the screen. Her mind went blank. The envelope lay in Princess Anne's hands like a weight made of ghosts. She had read it once, twice, and yet each time, the words struck her with the same crushing disbelief. It wasn't just what Charles had written, it was how he'd written it. Every sentence carried that quiet tone of finality, as though he knew this would be his last act as both a king and a brother. For days, she carried it with her, tucked beneath the lining of her handbag. She couldn't bear to part with it, but she also couldn't bring herself to destroy it. Every time she touched it, it burned, a physical reminder that she was holding the future of the monarchy in her hands, and wasn't easily shaken. She'd faced decades of palace chaos, divorces, betrayals, media wars, but this was different. This was a secret so volatile it could blow open centuries of royal tradition. And yet, it wasn't just the words that haunted her. It was the feeling that something else was buried within them. Charles wasn't a man of emotion, at least not outwardly. He'd always masked his heart behind duty, behind his crown. But in that letter, there was something raw, something almost pleading. She couldn't let it go. Late one night, she returned to the study where she'd first found it. The castle was dark, the only light coming from the fireplace's faint glow. She poured herself a glass of scotch, Charles's favorite, and sat down at his desk. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the air. She unfolded the letter once more, tracing her finger along his handwriting. Then she noticed something she hadn't before. The way certain words were underlined, not once, but twice. Words like forgiveness, truth, future. And in the margin, barely visible in pencil, were the initials DS. Anne's brow furrowed. DS? Those weren't Charles's initials. He never annotated letters this way. He was far too formal, too deliberate. This wasn't just a personal message, it was encoded. Someone had seen this before her. She stood abruptly, heart pounding. If Charles had trusted someone else with this, if there was another copy, then she wasn't the only keeper of his final wish. She needed to know who DS was. The next morning, she summoned her private secretary, a man who had served her for over a decade and who, like her, understood discretion better than most. Find me every staff member with those initials, she said simply. By midday, the answer arrived. David Summers, her secretary said. The king's former private archivist. He retired 3 years ago, lives quietly in Sussex. And remembered him vaguely, soft-spoken, meticulous, the kind of man who remembered every detail of royal correspondence but never made eye contact for too long. The kind of man who could be trusted with state secrets, or could vanish with them. She didn't waste time. That afternoon, she made a rare decision, to go see him herself. No entourage, no escort. Just her driver and her thoughts. As her car sped south through the English countryside, she couldn't shake the unease twisting in her chest. If Summers had been involved in preserving this letter, then there was a chance he had others. And if there were others, then the secret wasn't safe. The cottage in Sussex was modest, white walls, ivy creeping up the sides, a small garden out front. Summers opened the door himself, surprised but unshaken to find the Princess Royal standing on his porch. "Ma'am," he said, bowing slightly. "Mr. Summers," she replied, her tone cool but direct. "You know why I'm here." His eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. He nodded and stepped aside. "Please, come in." Inside, the home was neat, quiet, filled with old books and the faint smell of tea. He gestured toward the sitting room. "I assume this is about His Majesty," he said softly, and didn't sit. "Tell me, Mr. Summers, did my brother ever ask you to preserve personal documents? Letters, recordings, anything not part of official archives?" He hesitated. Her Majesty the late Queen had a rule. Personal correspondence was to remain private unless authorized by the Crown. "I'm not asking about her rules," and snapped. "I'm asking about my brother's." Summers sighed. Yes, there were letters. Dozens, in fact, all sealed by his hand, delivered under his instruction. But I never read them. Do you know who they were addressed to? He hesitated again, then met her eyes. "One was to you, ma'am, and another to Prince Harry." Anne's heart stopped. He wrote to Harry? Yes, hand-delivered to his representative weeks before His Majesty's health declined. I was told not to speak of it. Anne's knees felt weak. "Do you know what it contained?" "I don't," he said quickly, "but I can guess." She stared at him. "Yes." "Ma'am, Summers said carefully. The king was troubled about the succession. He spoke of it more openly than he should have. Said that the next sovereign should be a bridge, not a wall. He admired Prince William's steadiness, but feared the monarchy would lose its soul if it became too polished, too corporate, as he put it. He believed Harry, for all his flaws, carried something the people could love again, and turned away, trying to steady her breath. It was true, then. Charles hadn't acted in a moment of weakness. He had planned this, thought it through. He wanted Harry to take the crown, but not while bound to Meghan. And now Harry knew. When she left the cottage, the sun was already setting. Her driver opened the door, but she paused before getting in. The wind whipped across the open fields, carrying the faint scent of rain. She looked back at the house. Inside, David Summers stood by the window, watching her go. His expression was unreadable, part sorrow, part warning, and knew what that look meant. Secrets were no longer secrets. By the time she returned to London, her private phone had exploded with messages. The palace was on edge. Someone had leaked the news that Harry had been contacted privately by senior royal sources. The tabloids were ravenous. "Has the prodigal prince been called home?" screamed one headline. "Shock twist. King Charles to name Harry his successor," shouted another. Anne's blood boiled. It was too soon. She locked herself in her study, letter in hand, and tried to piece it together. There were too many moving parts now. Too many people who knew too much. William would demand answers. The press would dig. Harry would call. And then there was Meghan. And sat in silence, staring at the letter. The king's words played in her mind over and over again. "If he returns to this family and frees himself from the influences that divide us." She whispered to herself. He meant Meghan. He always did. The realization was like a knife. And had never liked confrontation, but she'd never avoided it either. She knew what she had to do. Harry needed to hear from her, directly. The truth couldn't be buried now. The longer it stayed hidden, the more dangerous it would become. That night, she sent him a private message. Simple, deliberate, heavy with meaning. "Harry, we need to talk. It's about your father. And your future." She stared at the screen before pressing send. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, 3 dots appeared. He was typing. Her pulse quickened. When his reply came, it was short. "I already know, but I need to hear it from you." And leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. He knew. But how much did he know? Had he seen his copy of the letter? Had Meghan read it? Was she the one fueling the leak? Or worse, was someone inside the palace feeding the information directly to them? And didn't have answers. But she knew one thing for certain. The king's dying wish had already started a fire that couldn't be put out. She folded the letter one last time, tucked it into an envelope, and placed it inside a safe behind the wall portrait of Queen Elizabeth. As the lock clicked shut, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Charles. I tried." The clock struck midnight, and somewhere across the ocean, a phone began to ring. Meghan Markle's voice broke the silence. "Harry, why is your aunt texting you?" He hesitated. "Because she knows something you don't." The silence that followed the king's deterioration wasn't ordinary silence. It wasn't peace. It was the kind that hums with tension, heavy with secrets and eyes watching from behind closed doors. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, whispers became currency. Every corridor carried fragments of conversations half heard and quickly hushed. The monarchy, an institution built on order, was slipping into quiet chaos. Princess and could feel it everywhere she went. Courtiers avoided her gaze. Advisors spoke in coded phrases. Even the staff walked a little faster, as though hoping to escape the weight that hung over the palace like a storm cloud that refused to burst. The king's health was worsening by the day, and though the official bulletins still used words like resting comfortably, those inside knew better. His strength was fading, and with it, the certainty of the crown's future. And held the secret that could ignite it all. The letter, Charles's final wish, felt heavier now than ever. She had placed it in the palace vault, beneath security tighter than the crown jewels, but it may as well have been ticking like a bomb. Each passing day, the reality of it pressed harder against her conscience. The king's request wasn't just controversial, it was seismic. If it ever became public, it would tear the monarchy in half. She often found herself standing in the king's private garden, staring across the manicured lawns toward the gray London skyline, asking questions no one could answer. Was her brother right? Could Harry really be the one to save the monarchy? Or had illness clouded the king's judgment, twisting regret into dangerous sentiment? And wasn't sure anymore. But what she was sure of was this. The silence around her brother's illness was unnatural. Too clean. Too controlled. That morning, when she arrived at the palace medical wing, something immediately felt wrong. Two guards she didn't recognize stood at the door. When she asked who had authorized them, they exchanged a glance before replying. Her Majesty the Queen Consort, ma'am. Camilla. Anne's expression hardened. She entered without another word. The king was asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Machines hummed softly around him, their lights blinking like the rhythm of time itself. Camilla stood by the window, her posture straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She turned as Anne entered, a tired smile flickering across her face. "And," she said, "you should get some rest. You've been here every day. I could say the same to you." And replied, her tone calm but sharp. "How is he this morning?" "The same. The doctors are optimistic." "They've been optimistic for weeks," and said quietly. "That's their job." Camilla hesitated. "He's strong. He'll pull through." "Perhaps," and said, looking down at her brother. "But if he doesn't, there are things you and I must discuss." Camilla stiffened. "About the succession?" Anne's eyes flicked to her. "You already know." Camilla's lips pressed together. "I know enough. He's been unsettled, talking in riddles, saying strange things about forgiveness and family. I assumed it was medication. It wasn't," and said. "It was clarity." Camilla looked away, her voice trembling slightly. "And you believe him? That he truly wants?" "I don't have the luxury of believing or not believing," and interrupted. "I have his words. And I have a duty to ensure they're respected, however impossible they may seem." Camilla turned sharply. "Impossible is the right word. You'd risk destroying William? You'd undo everything your mother built? For what? Sentiment." Anne's expression didn't change. "For truth." The Queen Consort's jaw tightened. "You sound just like him." "I hope so," and said quietly. "He's my brother." For a moment, they simply stood there, the air thick between them. Then Camilla turned away, her voice lower now. "If you care about him, about what's left of this family, keep that letter buried. The world doesn't need to know his last thoughts." And stared at her. "But Harry does." Camilla's shoulders stiffened. "No, especially not Harry." But the decision was no longer hers to make. The silence they were trying to maintain was already cracking. Beyond the palace gates, the media was circling like vultures, hungry for a story. Inside, the royal press office was scrambling to suppress rumors that someone in the royal circle had made unauthorized contact with Prince Harry. The tabloids were calling it the ghost correspondence. No one could confirm the details, but they didn't need to. The narrative had taken shape. The public loved the idea of a family at war, of secrets whispered in candlelit corridors. And with every headline, the tension inside the palace tightened like a rope. That evening, Anne attended a private dinner with senior advisors and the Archbishop of Canterbury. The discussion was meant to be routine, succession protocols, health contingencies, but halfway through, the Archbishop leaned forward, his voice unusually quiet. "Princess Anne," he said, "there have been murmurs. About a document. Something His Majesty wrote." Anne's fork paused midair. "Who told you that?" "No one directly," he said. "But the crown's secrets are never as sealed as one hopes. I must ask, does it concern the line of succession?" And studied him. "Why do you ask, Archbishop?" "Because if it does, and if it contradicts existing declarations, we must be prepared. The Church of England cannot be caught unawares in matters of divine right." His words hit her harder than expected. Divine right. The phrase sounded ancient now, almost irrelevant in a modern world. But within the monarchy, it still held weight, a reminder that, no matter how human they were, their decisions still carried the illusion of divine order. And Charles, in his dying act, had defied that order, and took a slow sip of wine before responding. "If such a document existed," she said carefully, "I assure you it would only seek to preserve the spirit of the crown, not destroy it." The Archbishop nodded, but his eyes told her he didn't believe a word. After dinner, Anne retreated to her quarters, exhausted. The palace lights outside her window twinkled faintly against the night sky, and for a fleeting moment, she thought of her mother. What would Queen Elizabeth have done? Would she have obeyed the king's wish, or hidden it to preserve the institution she'd devoted her life to, and wasn't sure anymore. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages. One unread notification caught her eye, an email from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "The world deserves to know the king's truth." Her stomach dropped. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "If you don't release the letter, someone else will." Attached was a scanned image. The first page of the letter. The king's handwriting unmistakable. And froze. Her mind raced. Only 3 people had access to the original document. Herself, the archivist David Summers, and the royal private secretary. If this image was real, someone had either photographed it during its transfer or leaked a copy before it was sealed. She immediately called Summers. No answer. Then again, nothing. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. And called her security liaison. "I need a trace on an outgoing transmission from Sussex. Now." Priority 1. As she waited, her thoughts spiraled. This was more than a leak. This was blackmail. Someone was playing with fire, and if the image reached the press, the monarchy wouldn't just face a scandal. It would face an existential crisis. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. The trace confirmed her worst fear. The email originated from Summers' region, and clenched her fists. "He promised he didn't read it," she whispered. He lied. But there was no time for anger. The palace crisis team had already detected chatter among royal correspondents. Reporters were preparing to release explosive new details about the king's secret succession letter. The silence that had held the kingdom together was finally cracking open, and the echo was about to be deafening. The next morning, the front pages hit the stands. The king's final secret, letter that could change the crown. Prince Harry named successor. If he returns home. Divorce demand shocks palace insiders. The palace press office went into meltdown. Phones rang nonstop. Advisors scrambled to issue statements. William demanded an emergency meeting with his aunt and uncle. Camilla locked herself in her suite, refusing interviews, and sat alone in her study. The newspapers spread across her desk. She could barely breathe. The words she had spent weeks protecting were now plastered across the world. The silence had broken. For a brief, fleeting moment, she thought about denying it. The palace had done it before. But deep down, she knew that would only make it worse. The letter was real. The world already believed it. And sooner or later, Harry himself would respond. She turned on the television. News anchors spoke with the practiced urgency of people who smelled blood in the air. While Buckingham Palace has not confirmed the authenticity of the alleged letter, sources close to the king suggest that Princess Anne has indeed been entrusted with personal documents detailing his final wishes. The question now is, what will she do? Anne leaned back, eyes closing. The question wasn't what she would do anymore. It was what Harry would. And she already knew. He wouldn't stay silent. She whispered to herself, "It's begun." When the story broke, Prince William was in Windsor, preparing for what was supposed to be a routine meeting with the Home Office. His morning had started like any other, briefing papers, policy summaries, security updates, until his private secretary entered the room, pale and visibly shaken. He was holding a copy of the Times. William didn't need to look twice. The headline screamed at him in bold letters that seemed to echo through the room. The king's final wish, Prince Harry named successor if he returns alone. He stared at it for a long time, his face still, unreadable. Then, without a word, he folded the paper in half, set it on the table, and said quietly, "Cancel everything." "But, Your Royal Highness." "Everything," he repeated, this time with the kind of controlled authority that left no room for debate. The aide bowed his head and left the room. Only when the door closed did William's composure fracture. He reached for the edge of the desk and gripped it so tightly his knuckles whitened. His mind spun through possibilities. Rumors, speculation, fabrications, but deep down he knew. He knew. The story was true. He had seen it coming, of course. There had been whispers around the palace for weeks. Hushed conversations between courtiers, the subtle avoidance whenever his father's name came up. Even Anne's behavior had changed. She'd been distant, guarded, carrying some unseen weight. He'd asked her about it once, half joking, but her answer had been evasive. "Some things," she'd said, "are best faced when the time is right." Apparently, that time was now. He snatched up his phone and dialed her number. She answered after a few rings, her voice steady but quiet. William, you knew, he said flatly. Didn't you? There was a pause. I knew something, she replied. Not everything. Don't do that, he snapped. Don't use words like that with me. You've read it, haven't you? The letter. Her silence was answer enough. He exhaled sharply, pacing the room. Why didn't you tell me? You of all people. Aunt. And how could you keep this from me? Because it wasn't my place to tell, she said. It was your father's wish. He laughed bitterly. His wish? His wish is to humiliate me in front of the entire world? To hand the crown to my brother, the same brother who abandoned this family, who insulted this institution at every turn. William. No, he cut her off. You had a duty to warn me. Instead, I had to find out like everyone else, from the press, from tabloids. Her tone softened. It wasn't about you, William. It was about him. Your father wanted peace before he left this world. Peace. His voice broke with disbelief. You think this brings peace? He's thrown us into war. There was a long, heavy silence between them. Neither spoke for several seconds, until, and said quietly, I didn't expect it to come out this way. You mean you didn't expect to get caught? He replied coldly. She didn't answer that. She couldn't. He ended the call without another word. For a few moments, he just stood there, the weight of his father's betrayal pressing on his chest like armor he could no longer carry. He'd spent his entire life preparing for this role, trained from birth, molded by duty. Everything about him, from the way he spoke to the way he walked, was shaped by the expectation that he would one day be king. And now, all of it, all those years of responsibility, all those sacrifices, meant nothing. One letter had changed everything. He looked out the window toward the palace gardens, where his children often played on quiet afternoons. The thought of George, Charlotte, and Louis, his legacy, his blood, made his throat tighten. How could his father do this to them? To him? To the very line that was meant to secure the future of the monarchy? He turned sharply toward his communications director. Get me a statement ready. Something that reaffirms the existing line of succession. And make it firm. No ambiguity. Sir, that might be seen as. I don't care how it's seen, he said, his voice hard. Do it. The man nodded and hurried out. William sat down heavily in the armchair, head in his hands. Beneath the fury, there was something else, something deeper and far more dangerous. Fear. Not fear of losing the throne, but of losing the family. If this rift deepened, there would be no recovery. The monarchy didn't survive division. It survived illusion. The illusion of unity, of strength, of purpose. And now that illusion was breaking apart, one headline at a time. He thought about his father, frail and fading in that hospital bed. For years, they'd had their differences. Charles the idealist, William the realist. But they had always understood each other's roles. Until now. Now he wasn't sure he understood his father at all. He stood abruptly, pacing again. He needed answers. Not from aides, not from advisors, but from and herself. The phone call wasn't enough. This needed to happen face to face. Within an hour, his car was pulling into the courtyard of Clarence's house, where and had retreated following the media storm. She was waiting for him in the drawing room, her usual calm expression barely masking the exhaustion beneath it. He didn't waste time. I want to see the letter. William, I want to see it, he repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut through the air. And sighed. It's in the vault. You know that. Then get it. Even if I did, she said quietly, it wouldn't change what's written in it. He stepped closer. You think I don't deserve to know the exact words my father used to destroy my future? Her eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. He didn't destroy it. He redefined it. William shook his head in disbelief. You sound just like him. Perhaps that's because I was the only one who listened to him, she said. Really listened. You've been preparing for a throne your whole life, William. But your father, he's been haunted by the ghosts of it. By mistakes he never wanted you to repeat. He glared at her. And giving the crown to Harry fixes that. Maybe not, she admitted. But it was his truth. And he wanted it known. He turned away, pacing again, the anger boiling just beneath his calm exterior. He's rewarding rebellion. Betrayal. That's what he's doing. No, she said quietly. He's rewarding humanity. Something this family has forgotten how to show. He turned back to her, eyes burning. Humanity doesn't rebuild the monarchy, Aunt Anne. Duty does. Discipline does. Tradition does. And met his gaze. And yet, it's humanity that keeps the people watching. That silenced him for a moment. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The public adored Harry in a way they never had him. Harry was emotional, relatable, flawed. William was everything a monarch was supposed to be, but not necessarily what people wanted anymore. Still, he couldn't accept it. If this gets out any further, he said finally, it won't just divide the family, it will destroy it. Anne's voice softened. Then help me contain it. He frowned. How? Talk to him, she said simply. Talk to Harry. Before the press, before the advisors, before Meghan gets involved. Talk to your brother as your mother would have wanted. The mention of their mother made him pause. For a fleeting second, he saw Diana's face in his mind. Warm, kind, endlessly patient. The memory stung. He exhaled slowly. You think it'll make a difference? And nodded. It might. And right now, that's all we have. He didn't answer right away. He stared at the portrait of their mother hanging above the mantel, the soft glow of the afternoon light illuminating her eyes. It was as if she were watching, waiting for him to make the right choice. Finally, he said quietly, Fine. But if I'm doing this, I'm doing it on my terms. And gave a small nod. Just don't wait too long. The world's already choosing sides. He left without another word. Outside, the air was thick with the hum of reporters and camera flashes. He ignored them, slipping into the car with his head bowed. As they drove away, he glanced down at his phone. Messages flooded in, calls from advisors, statements from Palace PR, even a request from Downing Street for reassurance of stability. But one message made his breath catch. It was from an unknown number. William, we need to talk. It's time you knew what father really said. It was signed simply, Harry. William's hand tightened around the phone. His jaw clenched. He read the message again, disbelief turning to dread. His brother had returned to the conversation, and that meant the storm was about to begin. Because no matter what came next, there was one truth he couldn't escape. The king's final wish had divided his sons, and only one of them could survive what was coming. Ever known. He stood barefoot on the back patio of his Montecito home, staring out at the ocean that stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs. The Pacific breeze carried the faint scent of salt and citrus, and yet, to him, it all felt hollow, like a life that didn't quite belong to him. Behind him, the glass door slid open. Meghan's voice floated out, soft but sharp. You've seen it, haven't you? He didn't answer right away. The headlines were everywhere. Every network, every front page, every social feed was screaming about the same thing. King's final wish, Prince Harry to take the crown. Without Meghan, it felt like the world was watching him all over again. He turned slowly. Meghan stood in the doorway, a tablet in her hand, her expression tight and unreadable. I told you, she said. I told you they'd come for us again. Harry sighed, rubbing his temples. It's not them this time, Meg. It's him. Your father? She said, incredulous. Harry, this is manipulation. They've twisted his words. They didn't twist anything. His tone was quiet, but his eyes were glassy, haunted. You know how my father writes. Formal, controlled. But that, he gestured toward the screen, that sounds like him. The phrasing, the restraint. It's him. Meghan's eyes narrowed. So you believe it? You actually believe your father's dying wish was to replace William with you, but only if you leave me. He hesitated. I believe he could have written it. I just don't know why. Meghan set the tablet down, her voice rising. Because it's another trap, Harry. It always is. They want to lure you back, make you the obedient prince again. And this time, they're using guilt to do it. He turned away, staring again at the horizon. Or maybe he just wants to fix what's broken. What's broken? She said sharply. You mean us? He flinched at that. Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. The waves crashed below, rhythmic and relentless, like the ticking of a clock he could no longer stop. Harry had dreamed of peace when he left Britain. A simple life. No courtiers, no tabloids, no suffocating expectations. But the truth was, exile hadn't given him peace. It had given him distance. And distance, over time, turns into disconnection. He'd watched his family from afar, seen the photos, the ceremonies, the smiles that looked rehearsed. And yet, no matter how far he ran, he could never escape them. The monarchy wasn't just in his blood, it was in his shadow. Now, it had followed him here. He turned back to Meghan, his voice low. You don't understand what this means. If he really wrote that, if it's real, it changes everything. About him. About me. About what comes next. Megan folded her arms. You're not seriously considering it, are you? Considering what? Going back, she said. Without me. He looked at her for a long time, and for the first time, she saw hesitation. Real, deep, painful hesitation. He finally spoke. He's my father, Meg. He's dying. What am I supposed to do? Ignore his final wish. Her voice softened, almost pleading now. You're supposed to protect your family. This family. Me. Archie. Lilibet. You walked away for us, remember? He nodded slowly. I remember. Every day. She took a step closer. Then don't let them pull you back in. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked past her, through the open doors, into the living room where the morning news was still playing. His own face filled the screen, grainy footage from an old interview, smiling, younger, naive. The voiceover cut through the image. That while Buckingham Palace remained silent, sources confirm that Prince Harry has indeed been contacted privately regarding the king's final wishes. No official statement has been made from California, but insiders say the Duke is deeply conflicted about what comes next. Harry muted the TV and sat down heavily. Conflicted didn't even begin to describe it. The truth was, he didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Betrayal? Somewhere deep down, beneath the resentment and pain, there was something else, guilt. For all their differences, he still loved his father. He always had. And now, knowing that Charles's last act might have been reaching out to him, asking him to return home, made his chest ache. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the moonlight spilling across the bed. Megan was beside him, but she was awake too, her breathing shallow, restless. Around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed. A private message. He hesitated before checking it. It was from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakable. Harry, we need to speak. It's about your father. Don't tell anyone. Anne. His heart pounded. He sat up, staring at the message, unsure if it was real. After a moment's hesitation, he typed back. Is it true? Did he really name me? The reply came almost instantly. Yes, but not the way you think. He swallowed hard. Then how? Another pause. Then, you'll have to come home to find out. He set the phone down, running a hand through his hair. Who is it? Megan murmured sleepily beside him. He hesitated. My aunt. Her eyes opened, narrowing. What does she want? He looked at her, torn. She wants me to come home. Her expression hardened. And you're actually thinking about it? He didn't answer. She sat up now, her tone sharp. Harry, you go back there, and they'll eat you alive. Don't you get it? You left because they never accepted us. They never will. He turned to her, his voice trembling. Maybe I left too soon. Her face fell. Too soon? You're saying that now. I don't know, he burst out, standing up. Maybe he just wanted to see me one last time, Meg. Maybe he wanted to say sorry. Maybe I owe him that. And what if this is just another trap? She shot back. You think they'll welcome you with open arms? You'll walk right back into their control, and I'll be the one they destroy next. Harry's shoulders slumped. They've already destroyed us, he said quietly. The room went still. Neither spoke after that. Megan turned away, and Harry stood by the window, watching the lights of Santa Barbara flicker in the distance. It struck him then how different those lights were from the ones back home. Softer, lonelier. By morning, the decision was already made in his heart, even if he couldn't admit it yet. He walked outside with a mug of coffee, staring out at the rising sun. The Pacific shimmered gold, endless and indifferent. Somewhere across that ocean, in a small room in Balmoral, his father lay dying. And a letter, his father's letter, was tearing apart everything that had ever defined him. He remembered his mother then. Diana. Her voice. Her laughter. The way she'd always told him to follow his heart, no matter where it led. He whispered to himself, "What would you do, Mom?" The breeze answered with silence. Later that day, he received another message from Anne. Your father doesn't have much time. If you want to know the truth, come now. He stared at the words for a long time. Then, quietly, he replied, I'll come. He didn't tell Megan right away. He couldn't. Not yet. But she must have known, because when she found him packing a small overnight bag later that evening, her face went pale. So that's it, she said. You're just going to run back the moment they whistle? It's not about them, he said softly. It's about him. She laughed bitterly. No, Harry. It's always about them. You just can't see it. He zipped the bag shut, eyes down. I have to do this. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. And when they make you choose, what then? What happens to us? He didn't have an answer. He didn't even try to give one. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, I'll be back. As he walked out the door, she said the words that would haunt him long after. No, you won't. The car pulled away into the California night, the road stretching endlessly ahead. He stared out the window, feeling the ache of everything he was leaving behind, the life he'd built, the family he'd made, the peace he'd promised himself. But duty, real or imagined, has a way of calling louder than comfort. As the plane ascended hours later, the lights of Los Angeles disappeared beneath the clouds, and the Atlantic stretched out like a cold, endless memory. Prince Harry was going home. But what awaited him there would test not just his loyalty, but the very meaning of family, forgiveness, and the price of truth. Because back in London, someone was waiting for him, with another letter. And what that letter said would shatter everything he thought he knew. The jet hummed steadily somewhere over the Atlantic, slicing through the night sky like a ghost in transit. Harry sat alone, staring at the dim lights above him, headphones resting around his neck, but no music playing. The cabin was quiet, too quiet, and the silence pressed against him like a weight. He'd spent hours trying to breathe, to think, to convince himself he wasn't walking straight into the lion's den. But there was no peace inside him, just a nervous, restless energy crawling under his skin. He wasn't a runaway prince anymore. He wasn't a British tabloid villain, not to himself at least. He was a son, and sons answer the call when their father is dying. And yet, in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, there was a reason you left. Meghan's last look, hurt, betrayed, scared, haunted him. She wasn't wrong to worry. Returning home meant stepping into everything he'd escaped. The scrutiny, the expectations, the invisible strings pulling tight around his throat. He rubbed his eyes and checked his phone for the 15th time in 2 hours. A familiar notification sat there, unread, from Princess Anne. He hesitated before opening it. Then, with a quiet breath, he tapped the screen. Land at RAF Nordholt. I'll be waiting. There's more you need to know, and it cannot wait. He felt his stomach twist. More information? He'd thought the letter was the shock. But this message sounded like a warning, not an invitation. He typed back slowly. What else did father say? Anne's response came almost instantly. You'll hear it from me when you land. And Harry, brace yourself. He swallowed hard. That tone. And wasn't dramatic. She was grit and discipline and iron spine. If she sounded shaken, then whatever she had to say wasn't small. Another vibration. Another message. This time, unknown number. No subject line. No signature. Just one chilling sentence. You're walking into a trap. Harry stared at the message, pulse spiking. His brain raced. Who sent it? How did they get his number? Why now? Before he could reply, another buzz. You think you're going home. But they aren't calling you back to honor your father. They're calling you back to Yendi you. He froze. A chill climbed up his spine, prickling every nerve. His first instinct? Meghan. This had her fingerprints. She protected him with ferocity. She knew palace games. She expected betrayal. Could she have sent this anonymously to scare him? But then again, the wording felt different. Colder. More pointed. More like someone inside the machinery of the palace, not outside it. He typed quickly. Who is this? No response. The sender disappeared. Number invalid. Like it was never there. The aircraft hummed on, indifferent. Harry exhaled shakily, leaning back, heart hammering. He shut his eyes, tried to breathe again. But instead of calm, a memory rose uninvited. Diana. Her voice. Her hand gripping his tiny fingers at Kensington Palace. Her scent of jasmine and warmth. Never let them decide who you become, Harry. Promise me. He had promised once. A child's vow, fragile and desperate. But life had twisted it. Then another memory. Princess Diana crying quietly, thinking no one saw. But he saw. He always had. The cruelty, the whispers, the cold rooms full of perfect people pretending they were flawless. His chest ached. Returning wasn't just about a letter or a crown. It was about unresolved wars. Ghosts. And now, a warning that smelled like danger. He reopened Anne's message. Brace yourself. Yeah, he was bracing. The plane descended into gray London morning, rain slicking the runway like tears on pavement. Harry pressed his forehead to the window. England looked exactly as he remembered. Heavy, old, familiar, suffocating. And yet, something inside him whispered, this is still home. At the tarmac, a black Range Rover waited, windows tinted darker than night. Someone important. Someone secretive. The door opened, and there she was. Princess Anne. No pomp. No royal wave. Just a simple, solemn nod. She looked older than he remembered, lines deeper, posture sharper, eyes tired. But her presence